It's funny that people used to look at Fran Stein and think, what a precious young thing. But just as Stein's evolution from child with a haircut dream and an 80-metre boot into the guy from down your local club who everyone says used to be really good back in his day, but you don't quite believe it until one night you see him absolutely tear it up playing Friday Night Touch, hasn't altered his ability to play, the Rugby World Cup's growth from amateur contests where dogs would regularly run onto the pitch to professional contests where dogs should regularly run onto the pitch hasn't changed the glory of seeing a youngster, green behind the ears and wet around the gills, take on rugby's greatest challenge. And so, to mark the release of this month's Rugby World magazine, guest edited by some loser I've never heard of, featuring a huge next generation special diving deep into many of the game's future stars, from Henry Arundel and Emmeline Galiton to Cecilia Tuipulotu and Fran McGee, as well as so much more. There's loads in here. Look at this. There's that in here. There's loads and loads of stuff in here. I wanted to kick off a new bonus little series by looking at the proud history of embryos turning out at the Rugby World Cup. Whilst Fran Stein might be the youngest player to ever win a World Cup, there's a few stories that are somehow even more remarkable throughout the competition's 38-year history. And indeed, that first tournament was awash with weans. After a controversial, unsanctioned tour to apartheid-era South Africa, half of New Zealand's finest players ended up suspended, disavowed, and injuries struck even more of them down, meaning the All Blacks were left with a squad of youngsters now looking to prove a point and make a disillusioned nation fall back in love with rugby. The ambition and freedom that young side played with helped bring New Zealand back from maybe the All Blacks' roughest ever patch. It's a similar story to Wales in 2011, a squad largely under 23, captained by an addition of Sam Warburton, so young this haircut was only 18 months ago, captured Cymru's imagination, playing glorious rugby and netting plenty of tries for George North, who to this day remains the youngest player to ever score at a Rugby World Cup. But there was one even more remarkable story from 2011. However, France's utter meltdown during that tournament is pretty well documented. After a battering by the All Blacks and then a loss to Tonga in the pool stage, the players kind of understandably lost faith in manager Marc Lièvremont. As they rolled towards the semi-finals, captain Thierry Dusautoir essentially took over as head coach. Lièvremont and a few of his assistants reportedly even banned from certain training sessions by the players themselves. It was Dusautoir and senior players such as Imanol Aronodiki, Dimitriashvili and William Servat devising tactics and running the sessions. By the final, so the story goes, the only power Lièvremont had over the squad was selection and substitutions, as they had to be handed to the IRB by the man that had been registered as the head coach. And so Lièvremont pulled exactly the kind of mental shit that made everyone realise he was mad in the first place. Naming scrum half Morgan Parrott at 10, a position he'd only played twice since school before the start of that tournament, with Yashvili at 9 for the final. On the bench, however, to cover both, Lièvremont went for an uncapped 20-year-old scrum half he'd only called up 2 weeks prior, with just a handful of professional games under his belt. And so, Jean-Marc Toussaint became the first and only player to ever make his international debut to win his first cap in the Rugby World Cup final. France. However, if you think that's wild, let me take you back to 1991 and the first formal Women's Rugby World Cup. And whilst now Worcester coach Joe Yapp running out for England at age 19 is impressive, it goes up a gear. For New Zealand selected a young lady by the name of Nioli Knight in their initial squad. Whilst injury limited to just one game, that was pretty remarkable in itself, seeing as Matatuni Knight was just 16 years old, making her the second youngest player at that tournament. For Wales' squad contained Sandra Phillips. Now, it's hard to find any details or photos of her on the internet or in either of the books covering this World Cup, but Sandra was already an established member of the Welsh women's national team when she played in that first World Cup, aged 15. The squad was captained by Lisa Burgess, herself having played for Great Britain at just 18, as well as for Wales in their first ever international, and then right the way through to 2006 at the grand, very extremely young age of 42. In fact, if you look through the youngest players at various World Cups, you very often find they're just legends in the making. Indeed, Sandra's male equivalents, the youngest there's ever been at a men's World Cup, might become one himself. Georgia's Vasil Lobzhenidze, selected shortly after his 18th birthday to break the record set by the USA's Fretten Palamo, who's still tearing it up in MLR in 2007. Lobzhenidze, in those 2015 pool games, instantly justified the hype. He was spectacular in that tournament and went on to establish himself as Georgia's first choice scrum half by the end of the pool stage, and arguably, by now, is already their greatest ever 9 at the age of just 26. This was only capped off last year when his man of the match performance took Georgia to a historic first ever away win over a Tier 1 nation as he laid the platform for their win over Wales. Yet there's one name I did leave out. Whilst the likes of Roman Untermack, Sadia Kabea, Cecilia Tuipulotu have a chance to build on their legacies going forward after a recent first World Cup, there's one man who never needed to build any further or get any higher. One youngster who changed it all forever. I am, of course, talking about Jonah Lomu. In 1995, Jonah Lomu changed rugby union forever. Nobody in the history of the game has ever had the instant impact that Lomu did, arriving on the scene at the 95 World Cup as a two-cap 20-year-old and going on to produce moments that will be talked about for as long as rugby union is played. Health troubles may have rocked his subsequent career, but Lomu in 95 was the pinnacle, the best form any player could ever reach at a Rugby World Cup by a teeny bopper the size of an average canal. There were only 3 players at the 95 World Cup younger than Jonah, and yet not a single one who would ever achieve the impact in the sport that he did before he could legally drink in Ohio. It's a high ceiling for this year's crop to reach. We're currently in the middle of the first Under-20s World Cup in 4 years, and it's a hell of a contest. The standard of this competition's gone through the roof in its absence. We've seen a heroic Georgia team cause 2 enormous upsets and be, frankly, screwed out of a semi-final. France look near unbeatable. They're just sumptuous to watch. Italy defeated the home nation South Africa in some absolutely unbelievable scenes. And we'll see even more this September as the first of their generation through the test match door take to the full fat Rugby World Cup. Caden Moody, Mason Grady, Tommaso Mananfello, Emilion Galiton, David Jenkins, Rugby World cover star Henry Arundel, and perhaps the most exciting of them all, Georgia once again's David Niniashvili. All players who we may yet look back on as legends in later years, yet given a unique chance to join this very proud group this September. Thank you for watching that. I hope you enjoyed it, as I hope you also enjoy the new issue of Rugby World magazine, which is on sale now all over the place, in newsagents all over. There's all sorts of stuff in here. There's there's Cecilia Tuipulotu, that's the most exciting page. There's London Irish, the best rugby schools. What else have we got? Rua Demand. There's so much in here. There's bloody loads of rugby and indeed world. And if you want to get 50% off a subscription for this kind of stuff to drop through your letterbox or come to you digitally every single month, then please use the link in the description, or there's a phone number there as well if you do want to do it old school, and register to get 50% off. Otherwise, you can just go and pick up this wherever you like. There's digital copies available as well. And I'll see you soon. Portugal coming up later this week, as well as more rugby.
So you actually like going out and dishing out the punishment a bit?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, we're going to beat the hell out of somebody and enjoy it.